Everyone again. This is Michelle, and it is Friday. And who doesn't love Fridays? And who doesn't love Disney? So this is going to be a Disney versus original story or fairy tale book or analysis review. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically talk about the Disney work while comparing and contrasting it to the original source material. And what I found really fascinating is how different of this particular one that I'm going to be talking about right now, which is Snow White for this week. And the interesting thing that I found about these two works is how each one kind of took a separate and different approach at showing us this fairy tale. So what I'm basically going to do is I'm just going to talk about what I read in the fairy tale, and then talk about how it's different and similar to the Disney version, and see if you can get any value out of each one of them, and if you have any thoughts or comments or concerns about it. So what I found interesting about the fairy tale is that it's very nicely written at some points. It kind of does make you feel as though that this is sort of a different world that it takes place in. Not in the sense of telling you like the area or the surrounding, but more that comes out of the emotions and out of the certain sentences that kind of make analogies to things. For example, the first paragraph, it starts out in the original fairy tale saying, once upon a time in the middle of winter, when the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the sky, a queen sat at a window sewing, and the frame of the window was made of black ebony. And whilst she was sewing and looking out the window at the snow, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow, and the red looked pretty upon the white snow, and she thought to herself, would that I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame. And I found that sort of fascinating, how they can take something like, blood or something like that and kind of make it almost kind of poetic and beautiful sounding. Like, oh, I want a child that has, something that refers to blood, and something that refers to snow, and then something that refers to the wood of a window frame. And I think that's just sort of how a lot of these fairy tales come out. They're very I want to say very descriptive of certain things when they talk about how they describe certain things by comparing them to certain maybe objects. And this fairy tale in particular sort of starts out that way in kind of showing a kind of interesting way of looking at the person that she's talking about in the first paragraph, which is Snow White. But in the original fairy tale, or in the Disney version actually, it's a little bit more shown with you through the animation. The animation in the Disney film is really well done. I can say it's probably one of the best animated films of probably all time, because for the amount of technology that they had during the 1930s to make something of this caliber, I think is really, really amazing. And I think that this style is more reflected with Disney with their animation, and obviously in the fairy tale it's more effective with the way they write things. But with the Disney fairy tale, it kind of doesn't really make those comparisons. A lot of what's in this particular original tale by the Brothers Grimm, where they more address things on a metaphorical kind of symbolic expression. Instead, the Disney version sort of shows you with the animation how it is this different world, and how a lot of that comes through the emotions of the characters in particular. So a lot of the fairy tale in the original Snow White is more based upon actual writing and explaining things through writing, and Disney sort of shows things through more through animation, and doesn't really make any of those comparisons that the original tale makes. And the fascinating thing about the Disney version is just the Disney version kind of just jumps in, gives you a little bit of background information like the opening of the book, but it doesn't really go into starting out with Snow White's mom. It starts with the first character we end up seeing is the Queen, the villain of the tale. So I found that rather interesting that Disney kind of decided to leave whatever happened in Snow White's past, sort of kept it completely out, and just sort of decided to start right when the jealousy between the Queen and Snow White kind of occurs. I also found fascinating that in the original version, it doesn't really say that she's like forced to dress in rags or forced against her will, and like in the Disney version where it explains like Snow White's wearing rags and she's forced to be in the confines of the castle, and she has to obey the Queen's orders. There's nothing really like that in the original fairy tale. It doesn't really explain, Snow White's conditioning as far as anything goes. All we know is that the Queen is her stepmother, and it doesn't even say in the fairy tale if the king died, but I guess I'm presuming that he did. It just says that the mom died. I guess I want to assume from giving birth to her, because obviously with the low amount of technology that people had back in those days, having a death by giving birth was a lot more common than it is today. So obviously you'll probably see that incorporated a lot. What I found fascinating too is how Disney tried to incorporate sort of the 1930s era into their fairy tale a little bit. You'll notice that Snow White has sort of this short hair like I do, and the 1930s women often had that kind of hairstyle, whereas a lot of the older versions of Snow White really don't. If you see like older pictures, they really don't show her as having, short hair, because this fairy tale was really meant to take place like in sort of a more middle-aged setting. So you'll see those like little incorporations that Disney tries to do. You'll also see with like Snow White's voice, her voice is a little strange to maybe some people in the Disney version, but that's only because it was popular during the time to have that voice. You may notice that it may sound a little bit like Betty Boop, and during the 1930s, that era or that style of voice was common to use, and a lot of people found it attractive and appealing when women had those kinds of voices. So it's sort of, you see the kind of cultural things that go on within the Disney version, and you also kind of see how the fairy tale is sort of different from that, and that it doesn't obviously go into those kind of cultural references. And I guess the basic things that I could say that are different about the plot in the Disney version compared to the original work is again the intro, like I said. And another big thing that I thought was different was that you do get the sense of darkness in the Disney version, but in the original fairy tale, it's probably maybe a little bit more sinister at certain instances, and actually less at some others. For example, Snow White in the original tale is sort of seen as, this threat, like in the Disney version, where she's a threat to this whole idea that the queen is the fairest of them all. But the thing that's kind of left out in the Disney version is the fact that there's this whole heart, and it is in both versions. But basically, what in the original tale says is that the queen should consume her heart, and so and that's kind of another thing that was added. It wasn't just in the Disney version. She tells the huntsman, "Okay, you need to go out and bring me back her heart," as sort of proof. It's kind of, in the Disney version, it's sort of labeled as evidence, whereas in the fairy tale, it's sort of hinted more as a kind of allegory that, if she consumes her heart, she'll somehow become like her, because no one is particularly like Snow White, and the only way to sort of, become Snow White is through the heart, through the soul, sort of, so to speak. And I think that's sort of an analytical perspective that you can take from both the Disney and from the original work. But it's more, I think, more hinted at in the original, because it actually involves her consuming the heart, actually saying, "Okay, I'm going to eat this." And at one point, I think I will say, and then it just says at one point, "The wicked queen ate it and thought she had eaten the heart of Snow White." So basically, in like the Disney version and like the original version, the huntsman brings back a pig heart, or a boar, you could say, and this is something that she ends up finding out later. But in the fairy tale, basically, she eats it. In the Disney version, it's just she wants to just use it as proof, as evidence, and that she's dead. So there's that kind of difference that you see going on between the two. What I also found interesting is that in the original tale, Snow White doesn't necessarily clean the house, unlike in the Disney version, where she's running away from the forest, running away from the huntsman who told her to run away because he couldn't bear to kill her. And again, there's this whole thing with the queen, and the huntsman feels like it's not in his heart to kill her, so she runs away. That's pretty much similar for both versions. But in the Disney version, when she comes to the dwarf's cottage, she kind of decides, okay, this is like little kids, I should like clean and do stuff and, make it all nice and pretty. And then it's where we get kind of a more lightheartedness to the whole thing. And there's a lot of animal companions in the Disney version. Like, there's a lot of animals that follow her, animals that help her clean and cook. None of that is in the original tale, really. The only time animals are mentioned is like further towards the end, which I will get to. But pretty much animals are kind of left out. Animals are not really part of the original work. And instead, in the original work, what ends up happening is just that Snow White is just so freaked out and so scared that she basically finds this cottage and says, okay, I'm going to stay there. And she sort of does this out of, desperation. And then once she's in the house, she decides to eat something and drink something and then sleep. She kind of doesn't really, there isn't like this whole kind of sort of, I want to say it's maybe a little bit more raw and a little bit more real, that somebody would come maybe into a house that they don't know and be a little bit desperate after, going through that crazy forest that she goes through, which is basically where the husband tries to kill her, and then when she runs off to the forest, it's all dark and creepy. And you get the sense of really creepiness in the Disney version as well as in the original tale. And then once she gets to the cottage, and she kind of has this whole transition where everything's okay, it's fine in the Disney version, because she has all these animals that are helpful and encouraging, and so that kind of dark-esque tone is sort of lost in the Disney version, and it goes to a more lighthearted type feel. But in the original, it's kind of just goes from one darker moment to another, and there's not really a lot of warmth to the original tale. So when she gets there and then she's desperate to just lay herself down and fall asleep, the dwarves come, and they actually mine different things than like rubies and diamonds and things like that. I think at one point it says they mine for like ore, gold, and copper, so nothing really like how it is in the Disney version, where they're getting like these really big diamonds and rubies and things like that. And when they come back, it's often like the three bears that come home and ask, who was doing this? Who was doing that? Because Snow White was sort of like messing up the house while she was there, because she was just trying to find food, trying to find sleep, and drink and things like that. So they don't really understand, and they're sort of freaked out. And the dwarves in the original tale actually kind of represent more of a one unit. They don't really have any personalities like in the Disney version. In the Disney version, you have Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Dopey, Doc, Bashful, and I always forget one. I always forget to name them all, but basically they have names attached to them, and they have sort of a personality that goes with that name, which I thought was really creative and was a good idea on Disney's part. But in the original tale, they work as sort of like a one sort of unit, or one kind of group. They don't really have a unique character. They're not really unique or interesting. They just kind of represent this one unit of these different dwarf-ish men. But if you look at the Disney version, the dwarves they work as a unit together, but then they also kind of have their own personality and have something that you can attach to and hold on to. And I think this is why this movie is so good, is because of the dwarves, because the dwarves are really interesting. Unlike the fairy tale, where they're just kind of there. And the funny thing is that when they finally find Snow White, and they don't automatically, like, she doesn't automatically just wake up and like have an introduction. It's basically they just find her and kind of go, oh, okay, there's this person in the bed, okay, we'll just sleep and talk about it the next day. And that's pretty much how that works in the original. But in the Disney version, basically they just like kind of hound up on her and get really freaked out by her, and literally almost want to like just clog her at one point, because they're like, how dare you come to our house, because they don't know who this person is. And then when they finally like see her and go, oh, okay, she seems harmless, it sort of goes off on the right footing. And it's kind of the same in the fairy tale, but instead of Snow White offering, hey, you know what, if you let me stay here and so I'm away from my crazy, stepmother that's trying to kill me, I'll cook and clean and sew and do all that great stuff for you. But in the original, the dwarves ask her, they're like, can you do all this stuff for us? Because we don't know how to do it. And she's like, sure, yeah, I'll do it. And that's really another difference I thought was interesting, is that, it wasn't really asked by, or it wasn't really an offering that Snow White was willing to give. It was the dwarves kind of saying, yeah, can you do this kind of stuff? I mean, because we could use it. And she goes, yeah, sure, I'll do that for you. So it's kind of, I thought that was interesting, even though it was just a little small thing. Now, another thing that I thought was interesting was the fact that the fairy tale is sort of split into these three parts of the queen getting her ultimate revenge. So she realizes that the heart that she ate was fake, because she goes up to the mirror and asks the mirror if she's the fairest, and he's like, no, you're not. Actually, Snow White's still alive, and he tells her where she is and things like that. And in case you don't know, basically the mirror is the main thing that the queen turns to when she asks who's the fairest of them all. I think you guys heard of this fairy tale too many times, and I mean, I don't really want to repeat it myself, but basically that's all he serves in this entire fairy tale. And she basically says in the original that, okay, she's alive, this is bad, I'm going to, get revenge. So in the Disney version, what she does is she gets so mad and so angry, she's so envious of a character, that she's willing to literally transform herself into like a really decrepit, old looking sort of witch, I want to say. But the thing is that in the original tale, it says literally like that it says she painted her face and dressed herself like an old peddler woman, and no one could have known her. So she doesn't like transform herself. It's not like she takes something to transform herself. She doesn't use like magic or anything. She just kind of just does an old doodle thing and just wears a cape or something. It's like, okay, I'm just gonna go out and find that woman. But the thing is in the Disney version, it's very more, I think it's in the Disney version, it's a lot more dark, because if you think about it, she's not just saying, okay, I'm just going to go out, paint myself, and, maybe she'll fall for it, and, nobody will recognize me, because, I mean, it says that nobody's going to recognize her, because the disguise of paint, I guess, is just so effective. I don't know. But she's actually willing to transform herself into an ugly thing and having herself drink literally some poison to make her, ugly. And I thought that was interesting that Disney decided to go with this and just go. And then she like uses the lightning to, kind of make it so that the potion becomes effective. And I think it's just really intense and really probably one of the most intense parts of the movie. And I actually thought it was a lot darker than the original tale, because all the original tale does is just says, yeah, she just disguises herself. Doesn't offer anything else interesting other than that. But you literally see the transformation in the Disney version. You literally see her hands become old and decrepit. You see her hair change. And her voice change too. So it's not just this, really sudden boof transformation. It's a very dark and decrepit transformation, and it's probably one of Disney's best. And I think that gives more insight into the character, actually, and how far she is willing to go to, do something crazy. So there's that. And the other thing that I found fascinating is that if you think Snow White is naive in the in the Disney version, you should see her in the original. My God. I mean, I don't mean to be mean on her character at all. I'm not trying to degrade her character in any way, but she is beyond belief very naive in the original tale. No doubt about it. It's not that the witch, or the queen, in this case, comes once to give her an apple. And the apple basically is, you know, a poisoned apple, but we'll get all to that later. But it literally takes, she comes back 3 times to Snow White, and each time, you know, Snow White almost gets killed, and the dwarves tell her, don't, you know, let people in the house 3 times, and still she doesn't, and still even after the 3rd time, she still doesn't get it. I mean, it's just so crazy. Okay, first the queen comes with, I believe it's silk. She comes first with, trying to see if they're taken out, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I want to make sure that I get this right. Let me see. When she reached home, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it's pretty much laces, just fabric. She comes with fabric instead of an apple at first, and she pretends to be like a beggar woman selling laces. And she comes to Snow White when the dwarves go leave off to do their job at the mine. And when this queen comes, or queen in disguise comes, she basically tells her, yeah, hey, here's some lace here, you know, want to try on some lace, yeah, And then Snow White's kind of like, oh yeah, sure, I'll try on some lace, yeah, that sounds fine, even though, you know, it's completely naive for her to let her in the house in the first place when the dwarves tell her, don't let anybody in, because if there's somebody out there to kill you, you should, you know, not let people in the house. So basically, the queen seduces her and tells her, yeah, just try on this lace. Oh, and then she tells her, let me try that on for you. And basically what she does is she just takes the lace and puts it around her neck and then chokes her. Like, literally just chokes her, leaves, and when the dwarves come back, they come back just in time, I guess, to release the lace. And then once they release the lace that's surrounded around her neck, she suddenly starts to breathe again, and then she's okay. And then the dwarves tell her, look, don't do this. Just don't bring anybody in the house. Just don't do it. Just don't do it, please, Snow White, for the love of God. And then you'd think that she would like learn her lesson by that, but no. And then the next time that the queen comes, because the queen realizes by the mirror that Snow White's not really dead, so she goes, oh, I have to go again. And then she disguises herself again, and then she goes back to Snow White and asks her, you know, there's combs. You know, I have combs. Ha ha. And basically this comb is a poisonous comb. And what the queen does is she says, oh, let me comb your hair for you. So basically it's the same thing again. You know, Snow White's naive, lets her in, lets her comb her hair, and then once she puts the comb in her hair, the poison just, I guess, somehow makes her just completely fade out. And then once the queen leaves and thinks that her job is done, and then the dwarfs come back and take out the comb, Snow White's okay again. And then the queen discovers this again, and then the queen goes back, and then she asks her, this time she comes with the apple now. This is the one where it was put into the Disney version. Now, this is the one where, actually I thought it was kind of interesting how the queen tricks her with this one. Instead of in the Disney version where she kind of tells her, you know, all your wishes will come true, ha ha ha. She tells her, look, this apple is not poisonous. And she tries to convince Snow White when she comes that this is not poisonous. How she convinces her of that is basically the queen makes the outer layer, the red part of the apple, poisonous. But what's inside the apple, like the white, is okay. So the way that she convinces Snow White that this apple isn't poison is that she eats the white part of it, but not the outer layer of it. And then Snow White, being as naive as she is in this fairy tale, falls for it again and says, okay, I'll have a bite of the apple, bites the apple, and then this is the part where the dwarves can't do anything about it. Because once the queen leaves and they come, they don't know how to, they say to themselves, well, she ate the apple, there's nothing we can do. And so they mourn for her, and the only time you hear a reference to animals is, and the birds came to and went for Snow White first, and an owl, then a raven, and the last a dove. So basically, they weep over her dying. They think she's dead permanently, and they don't find it in their hearts to bury her, like in the Disney version, like it says. And so basically what they do is they just put her in a glass coffin with golden letters, like it is in the Disney version, on her tomb, and basically they mourn for her. And so that happens. Now you might be wondering, okay, I know my Disney. Where does the prince come in? This is actually when the prince comes in the original tale. Yeah, you thought that Disney love was kind of strange? Well, in this tale, he doesn't come until she's dead, okay? In the Disney version, they set up this whole thing of how she knows the prince beforehand. The prince presents himself to her, declares his like undying love and devotion to her through a song, and they're happy in love however long you want. I don't know. The Disney version does not clearly state how long they've known each other, and I'd like to think that that can be interpreted however you want, because literally, you know, it could have been a consecutive amount of months that they've seen each other. You never know, because the way the Disney version plays out is it just has one scene with her and the prince in it, and then transitions to another scene with the queen, so we don't know how long or how many times they actually have seen each other. We just know from that one scene, oh, okay, they know each other. Now, in the original tale, he doesn't come until she dies, okay? And this is another king's son, so he's a prince. And this prince is actually kind of creepy. You thought that the Disney version, the fact that he comes out and says, today, you think that is a little odd or off. I actually thought that his bits in it were kind of cute, actually. In the original tale, it comes off as creepy. So, Snow White's dead. They can't mourn her. They can't put her in the ground. Because they look at her and they don't see her decrepiting or deforming in any way. And they feel like it's sort of maybe a disgrace to put her in the ground. So they just leave her out in a glass-filled coffin, for everybody to see. And then one day a prince just comes strolling along, and then he notices the coffin, and he notices that the Dwarves own it, and he basically says, and I quote, "Let me have it as a gift, for I cannot live without seeing Snow White. I will honor and prize her as my dearest possession." As he spoke in this way, the good dwarfs took pity upon him and gave him the coffin. So basically, he doesn't even, first off, he hasn't even heard a word that she said. Okay? He doesn't even know her consciously, like on a conscious level. In the Disney version, at least you get, the fact that Snow White is portrayed as sort of this innocent character that, you could tell by the way she presents herself that it would probably make her seem, appealing to a prince. But in this, it's clearly based upon, just what he sees, like her looks, like that she's pretty, and that she's like my greatest possession. Like, okay, that's just creepy. That's like going up to somebody and asking them, hey, you know what, that dead corpse you got in your backyard, That's a dear friend of yours, right? Yeah, could I take it and use it as kind of like my possession, like a vase or something? It's sort of like going to an auction and asking somebody to buy a vase or something. It doesn't seem like he's actually buying a human being. It's so weird. I mean, I really don't understand that part. It's really hard for me to even grasp that part. I don't get it. So that's a major difference. And I think that's really needs to be addressed in this whole plot as we go through this whole plot. Because literally that's what makes this fairy tale so interesting, is the fact that how creepy it is, and how Disney tried to de-level the creepiness. And I think they did an appropriate job of at least putting the prince beforehand, instead of having him just show up at the end of the story and just say, yeah, it's just, I'm come here to claim my princess, ha ha ha, So it literally makes more sense in the Disney perspective than it does with the fairy tale. But you could still say that's what makes the fairy tale interesting and unique. So if you want to say that, that's great. I just found that part a little strange and creepy. And then now we get the last part, which is actually very, very different. Now, the way that the villain, the queen, dies is different in both versions. In the Snow White version, the Snow White Disney version, the dwarves basically finish her off, but not in the sense that you think. The animals basically, since the queen only comes one time and comes only with the apple, and since there's all these other animals that are around Snow White and that also become sort of characters throughout the Disney version, they try to stop the queen, but then Snow White kind of says, no, you're all wrong, she's a nice lady. And even though I want to say, no, she's not, she's trying to kill you. But, so basically all the birds signal to the dwarves, hey, come on, you need to come back here. You need to come back here. You need to come on over, because stuff's going down, and you got to fix this, because they're gonna kill her. The queen's gonna kill Snow White. So basically, the dwarves somehow understand what the birds are trying to and the animals are trying to communicate to them, and when they get there, it's too late. But then they follow the queen anyway. And they basically follow her up to this mountain, and it's a really pretty intense climax, actually. I think it's rather cool with, like, the music, and I like how sort of the dwarves are like the heroes in the Disney version. I really like how they're like the stars of this movie. It's just so much fun to just watch them and go like, we're gonna get you, And then, so basically they follow her up to this high mountain, and what I thought was interesting is that the queen basically tries to kill the dwarves because they're kind of chasing her, and the queen has the lead. And when she gets up onto the mountain beforehand, she tries to use a really big boulder or really big rock and use it as a stick or a branch, and tries to gnaw it away at where it's sitting so it'll fall and tumble and then kill the dwarf somehow. And then basically karma just pretty much happens to her, and gravity takes over, and she kind of plummets all the way down from the mountain, and she dies. And then you see the vultures who kind of surround her and go, yeah, that's going to be our dinner for the evening. So that's basically her death in the Disney version. So there's that to understand. The original Disney version really basically follows a not so complicated formula. It basically says, the Snow White is seen as this perfect being, and the Queen's jealous. Queen tries to kill her, fails. Snow White meets up with the dwarves, and then There's only one time where the queen comes and tries to kill her and ends up succeeding for a certain amount of time, and then she ends up having her downfall with the dwarves. The dwarves actually have an impact as to what ends up actually happening to her, because she gets chased by them up onto that mountain, and that's up upon that mountain where she ends up plummeting to her death. So there's that. And that's basically how the plot plays out in the Disney-esque version. Now, what I'm going to tell you about the original version is actually somewhat different and rather strange. Basically, what happens is that once the dwarves kind of go, oh, okay, you know what, you can have her. You know, I guess it says they pity him, like they think that he like genuinely loves her somehow in this like crazy messed up fairy tale world. And so they say, okay, you know what, you can have her, it's okay. So basically the servants and the prince are walking down, carrying his servants are carrying the coffin. And basically what happens is and now the king's son has it carried away by his servants on their shoulders. And it happened that they stumbled over a tree stump, and with the shock the poisonous piece of apple which Snow White had bitten off came out of her throat, and before long she opened her eyes, lifted up the lid of the coffin, sat up, and was once more alive. So, yeah, there's no magic kiss. There's nothing of that. In the Disney version, there is a kiss. The prince comes, and he kisses Snow White, and that's basically the end of the spell. That's how a lot of Disney version fairy tale-esque things work. You know, the kiss makes everything happy, makes everything good. And it doesn't really play out that way in the original fairy tale, as I've just read off to you. Basically, literally just a servant's mistake ends up actually saving her. The prince doesn't really do much. All he does is just decide, yeah, I'm gonna take her, and, you know, she's gonna be kind of like, I don't know, my display that I'll look at for the rest of my life or something. And, and then that's just basically how it happens. And I found that really fascinating, that the prince really didn't, you know, if you think the prince didn't really do much in the Disney version, you should really look at the original tale and tell me that his significance in this tale is literally nothing. Like, he doesn't really do anything. All he does is just offer him, he just says, hey, you know what, can I have this? And they say, sure. And then, by coincidence, Snow White's able to, you know, survive and be revived. And then the prince is like, oh, we should get married, and oh, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's just so funny, because I don't even know if I would wake up and I'd go, yeah, sure, yeah, let's get married. And he's so, I guess, so in love with her, apparently, that he's just like, yep, want to get married. And then Snow White kind of goes, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm totally cool with this. And so on their wedding day, and since the queen is still alive in the original tale, and since she does not know that Snow White is dead, or Snow White is alive, because the mirror originally tells her, yeah, she's dead, so therefore you're the best. Woo, you're the best, biggest, greatest in the whole wide world. Yip-de-doo. She doesn't realize that Snow White ends up being revived. But at one point, she still wants to make sure, because she is still really paranoid, I guess, about it. So she asks, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And then the mirror goes, actually, a queen is, ha ha ha. Because, you know, since the prince is going to marry Snow White and he's going to become king, she's going to become queen. So basically that's how it works. And the queen is kind of taken aback, like, what? Who's this? And then she really gets mad and really envious and blah, blah, blah. And then when she actually goes to the wedding, because she is apparently, I guess, invited to the wedding, she sees that it's Snow White, and she's like, oh no, you just does not bring this up in here, you know? She just gets really, really mad. But she gets this most strangest, most weirdest karma that I think I have ever read. And I'm going to read the last paragraph to you guys so you can kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about here. Then the wicked woman uttered a curse, and was so wretched, so utterly wretched, that she knew not what to do. At first she would not go to the wedding at all, but she had no peace, and must go to see the young queen. And when she went, she knew Snow White, and she stood still with rage and fear, and could not stir. But iron slippers had already been put upon the fire, and they were brought in with tongs and set before her. Then she was forced to put on the red-hot shoes and dance until she dropped dead. So basically the karma that this queen has to go through is a shoe dance. A painful, iron, burning shoe dance. I don't know about you, but that's really, really weird. Really strange. I don't know what else how to put it. I don't really know. I think there's many interpretations, as you could say, what the shoes sort of represent. If that's like some sort of evil, I don't know. But for me, when I look at this, I go, what? The Disney version I thought was a little bit more clear with the death, like, you know, she just falls. It's gravity, you know. Gravity happens, you know. Facts are stubborn things. But in the original tale, it makes so much less sense why she would suddenly die by having to dance in shoes. And it doesn't say who administers this punishment. It doesn't say who's even watching this punishment. It's not even clear as to how this punishment is being really carried out. All it says is that she's punished in this form. So it doesn't really offer an explanation, but I think it can come up with people can come up with a variety of theories onto that. So basically what I can say about, the only thing that I haven't talked really about is Snow White and the Queen in both versions. Now, in the Disney version, I find her a little bit more interesting. She at least has some sort of innocence to her. I think that she's at least a little bit more humanistic, and I think a lot of little kids like Snow White because she's a little bit more childlike. And I think she's supposed to be one of the younger ones, apparently. So I can see maybe why younger kids identify with her, like more toddlers, I think, and really, really young kids like Snow White a lot because she's just very young, and I think that's why they find her appealing. In the original tale, there's really nothing interesting or really appealing about her. Like, they don't really give her any development or any really say. She's just kind of there to just be really, really dumb and just be the catcher of his possession. At least with the Disney version, Snow White was treated with a little bit more care than this version treats her. She kind of is just this character who just is the representation of I guess beauty and innocence, but we don't really see her really doing anything or contributing much as to show that she is beautiful or whatever. But in the Disney version, at least we get a sense that she's, you know, nice and supportive and caring for the dwarves, and you really get the sense in the Disney version the relationship they have. You feel their relationship. Especially with certain dwarves in particular. In this version, you know, when I read that the dwarves were like crying over her and stuff, I thought like, okay, did you guys really develop a bond with this woman? I mean, you don't even really go into like the whole relationship. There's no happiness to it. There's no. It feels like the relationship that she develops with the dwarves is just so lifeless in this original work. Whereas in the Disney version, it's more lively, and you can just tell by how they administer the dwarf characters. The Disney version Prince is pretty much the same as in the original work, where he's not really anything much, but at least he's not as creepy as he is in the original version. He's a little creepy. I think the closest character that they pretty much the Disney version and the original tale have in common is the queen. I mean, pretty much the queen is displayed as this really envious, wicked person. At least in the Disney version, I think they try to push that a little bit with the whole transformation scene. I think that really enhances it a lot and makes it a lot more profound. And I think the whole conflict with her and the dwarves at the end of the Disney version was actually quite interesting, and I think a little bit more well handled than in the original work, where she just dies from wearing and dancing to a pair of shoes. Rather strange. So yes, as far as final thoughts are concerned, I definitely would recommend that you read both. I think there's some unique aspects of the original tale that, can be looked at and can be appreciated, as well as there's a lot to appreciate, I think, from the Disney version. I encourage that you watch both and that you get a sense of both. And my crown is doing weird things to me. And the reason why I'm wearing this crown is because it's a princess movie. And every time there will be a Disney princess movie, when I do this Friday's video, I'm going to be wearing the crown. Because it's Disney and it's a princess movie, so yay. So I think this is really all I can say about these two works. I think they're both interesting and they both provide something unique to the table. Would I recommend maybe one more or the other? I don't know. I think I should leave that up for everybody else to decide. I think personally both of them are interesting. I'll make sure to put links to the Disney version as well as to the original source material. So you can look at both and you can kind of decide for yourself as you read it what kind of things you noticed or what you thought was interesting. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And until next time, which is tomorrow, I will see you then. Peace out.